What's up, guys? It's Ryan Allred with Pro Play Games and Ultra Pro. Today we're going to be going over a slightly different Volcanion list than the last time. This one focuses more on Starmie and a little bit less on the Turtonator and Ho-Oh and Kiawe strategy of the deck. I played it at the ARG Raleigh Standard Tournament and finished in the top 8. We ended up all prize splitting in top 8, so there wasn't really a winner to the tournament. We all just decided to take the money and go home so we wouldn't have to stay and play all day. I'm going to go over the deck list really quick, some of the matchups, and why I like it so much in the current format. So this is the deck list. You'll notice it's pretty similar to the last one we showed off on here. We're playing 3 copies of Volcanion EX. That lets us power everything up, obviously. It's, it's the name of the deck. We're still playing 2 Turtonator GX in the deck. This time, though, we're only playing 1 copy of Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is a stupid good card because it does 180 damage for 4 energy. It's definitely what we want to hit with Kiawe every game. Kind of the problem, though, is that hitting Kiawe turn 1 just isn't consistent enough. When that strategy works, it's beautiful, and you end up doing so well in the game. But when you focus the deck's whole strategy around hitting that Kiawe and you miss, it just sets you too far back. So with this deck list, I decided to try and focus more on consistently setting up. And you know what? If I hit the Kiawe turn 1, that's awesome. That's that's cool. But the deck doesn't have to for it to work. The kind of the reason why that happens is the baby Volcanion. We're playing 3 copies this time instead of the 1 copy I played before. Ideally, this is how we're going to kind of start our game. If we go first, the Kiawe is perfect. If we go second, baby Volcanion can be, in a lot of matchups, a better option. If we can Power Heater and get 2 energy on the board with Power Heater, yeah, it's not 4 energy, but we're also getting to draw a bunch of cards. So Baby Volcanion's kind of the better opener for going second. We still have 2 copies of Tapu Lele. I don't like 3 in this deck. We can't effectively attack with it. You can attack with it, but all of your other attacks are so much better that Tapu Lele ends up taking up space on the bench that we really can't afford. Beyond that, we're not trying to have very long games. So, we can Tapu Lele once for a Kiawe and again for a Guzma, and, we're going to try and close out the game in 4 or 5 turns at most. So Tapu Lele it's great, but I think 2 is enough. We're still playing 1 Oranguru. Again, I don't think that's optional. I think you have to play Oranguru. It lets you win the game. It lets you come back from an N. This deck tries a little bit more to be consistent and not focus so much on winning as quickly and being able to recover, but still, you got to play that Oranguru or else you get end to 1 and lose. This is still obviously a fast, aggressive deck, but the one thing that helps is that we have Starmie. Staryu retreats for free, so that's super big turn 1, and Starmie lets us get our fire energies back. Starmie's always been good, especially since we got Brooklet Hill, so we can consistently get it out. After rotation, I actually didn't like Starmie as much. I don't feel like you need it, but I tried testing with it just to see, what the difference was. I didn't really see much of a difference in most of the matchups, but I saw a massive difference playing Starmie against Gardevoir. Against Gardevoir, it's hard to get the one-shot knockouts with Turtonator because you need to get 3 energy on it, you need a tool attached, and you need 2 steam-ups. Maybe you can do 3 steam-ups if you get 3 Volcanion EX in play, but that's not really practical. So the tough part is, a lot of times you only have 2 energy attached to it, so you need to get 3 energy in your hand and the tool to be able to take the knockout. So Starmie lets us get 2 of those energies at least, and it even lets us reuse kind of the energy we've got in our hand. So it just makes it a lot more consistent taking a one-shot on a Gardevoir EX or GX. And if you take a one-shot on Gardevoir GX, that really, really helps the matchup because they probably won't be able to get a return KO on your Turtonator if he only has 1 energy. And if they don't knock out your Turtonator, then the next turn you can Nitro Tank and get set up for those last 2 prizes to win the game. So Starmie, I noticed it really helps in the Gardevoir matchup. So this is kind of the list I'm looking at going forward. Obviously, Gardevoir is still not a good matchup, but it bumps it up to probably like a 40-60, where you have like a 40% chance of winning against an equally skilled player. Which also means if it's a less skilled player, your odds go up a lot more. I think previously, you could be the better player and go in against the Gardevoir matchup, and you'd still lose a majority of the time. Now I think that this gives you a lot of room to take games you shouldn't have been able to. For our supporters, we have 4 Sycamore, and we went down to 3N. Again, it's a fast deck. We're going aggressive, and it's just a little tight on space. So we had to make a cut somewhere, and this ended up being the extra N. I don't think there's the room for it, but if I could, I would like a 4th N in here. But there are other cards I want more. We have 4 copies of Guzma. Like I said in the other one, I would play 5 copies if I could. Guzma's just so good in this deck. I don't want to have to deal with trying to retreat. I want to be able to reset my Ho-Oh and my Volcanion's attacks. And I want to be able to take a 2-prize knockout when my opponent tries to deny me that. So 4 Guzma definitely needed. We're only playing 1 copy of Kiawe. The reason, kind of like I've been mentioning the whole time, Kiawe is really good, but it's just not very consistent. If we build the deck around making Kiawe happen, it doesn't help us a lot percentage-wise. It'll make it, instead of hitting Kiawe 30% of the time, we hit Kiawe 35% of the time. And it's just not worth it. So 1 copy is kind of good enough. If we prize it, that's going to be 10% of the games. But we don't hit Kiawe every game anyway, so 10% of a smaller percent ends up meaning the second Kiawe just doesn't make a big enough difference. We're playing 2 copies of Brooklet Hill. Brooklet Hill is primarily to get Staryu out turn 1. The reason being, if we get Starmie before we get Staryu, and we have to discard the Starmie ends, it kills the whole line. So Brooklet Hill lets us get that Staryu out turn 1, so that the next turn we have access to Starmie. Obviously, it also lets us grab Volcanion EX, which is super big because Volcanion EX is how we get all of our damage done. So Brooklet Hill is pretty good. Like I said, I wish I didn't have to play it, but it makes Gardevoir so much better that I think the Starmie Brooklet Hill build is the way to go. We have 4 copies of Ultra Ball. I'm going to say that every time. 4 copies of Ultra Ball is just a given. We have 4 copies of Max Elixir. I still think 4 is the right way to go. That's usually one of the big things I'm counting in my discard is how many Max Elixirs I have left, because that determines, assuming I draw everything I need, how much damage output I can do and whether I can take a knockout this turn. We have 2 Field Blowers. I've tested the deck with 1. You end up getting shut down by Garbotoxin too much with only 1, and more people are playing Fighting Fury Belts, and you struggle to take knockouts against things with Fighting Fury Belts sometimes. It lets you get rid of stadiums you don't like Parallel City, because we've seen people playing Parallel City now, and no matter which way they play Parallel City, it's going to screw you over. You usually have a huge bench size, and you also need the damage output. So if it kills you by 20 damage, that ends up hurting you a lot. It also, your opponent's almost always going to have tools down. People play so many tools right now in this format that bare minimum it'll knock off a choice band, and if they don't draw into another choice band, maybe it saves you from getting knocked out. So Field Blower is just stupid good. I think it's good enough to play 2. There aren't enough situations where I draw into it and I go, oh, Field Blower, this is useless. So I like playing it for sure. We have 1 copy of Nest Ball. I think I'm I don't think I would play a Volcanion list without Nest Ball. I know I said I'm not really focusing too much on Kiawe, but Nest Ball more than anything helps you get a meaningful Kiawe because it lets you grab a Ho-Oh so that you can Kiawe onto that Ho-Oh instead of something useless. It's another consistency card despite not looking like it because it lets you grab a Rangaroo, um, and it saves you from having a dead hand in a lot of situations. The other big thing it grabs is this baby Volcanion. Um, like I said, that's kind of our focus if you go second is attacking with Power Heater. And Brooklet Hill doesn't grab baby Volcanion. So you either have to draw into it, spend an Ultra Ball on it, or you can use Nest Ball. Since going second your first turn, you ideally want to have a baby Volcanion and 2 Volcanion's EXs on the bench so that you can Power Heater and accelerate 2 energy onto the bench. Nest Ball gets you one of those 3 Pokemon. Rescue Stretcher, it's super essential. It can get you your Starmie back. It can turn into an extra Tapu Lele. I've seen decks playing Super Rod, but I almost always use Rescue Stretcher to put the Pokemon in my hand directly. So Super Rod can't do that. Super Rod will also put the fire back in your deck, which when you're playing with Starmie can be really bad. You kind of want to make sure that you have fire in your discard if you have Starmie in play, because if you get end out of all that energy, you don't have access to any. So it means a lot of games you'll actually want to steam up energy that you don't, even if it doesn't help you with damage, you've already got the knockout, you still want to steam up those energies if you don't have any in your discard to make sure that the next turn you have access to more energy. For switching cards, we're playing 2 Floatstone and 1 Switch. Normally I like 3 Floatstone better. The Switch can be kind of cute because it lets you reset your attack. You can switch and then retreat so that you can Volcanic Heat again, or use Ho-Oh's Phoenix Burn attack. But that's pretty situational. The odds of that mattering are kind of slim. Really, the reason we're playing 2 Floatstone and a Switch is because we have 4 copies of Fighting Fury Belt, which I love the 4 copies. It makes your guys bulkier so that your opponent misses knockouts. That happened a ton of times playing this deck at the tournament. The 10 damage output is also really big against non-EX Pokemon. The biggest thing being Power Heater and Shell Trap, because it turns the 20 into 30, and then with a single Steam Up, it turns that into 60. And 60 is the number you need to hit if you want to knock out a Alolan Vulpix or a Ralts, or all these stupid unevolved Pokemon that everyone's playing. So Fighting Fury Belt super big. Yeah, I loved playing it with 4. The only downside being if you have a Fighting Fury Belt attached, you can't attach a Floatstone, so you can't retreat the Pokemon. So sometimes a Switch is really your only out there. Kind of like I mentioned though with Starmie getting fire in the discard, sometimes you want to hard retreat. You want to get that fire into the discard instead of being on your Pokemon, which is really counterintuitive, but you need the energy in your hand to be able to steam up. Instead of being on a Volcanion, especially a lot of times if the Volcanion has 150 damage on it, it doesn't really help you having energy on it that much. So you might be better off having it in your discard. Finally, we're playing 13 fire energy in the deck. I know before I had 14, but like I've mentioned before, like this deck is not focused around Kiawe. So the reason you had to play so many before is once you Kiawe, it takes all the energy out of your deck, and then suddenly your max elixirs don't do anything. We also didn't have any energy recovery cards in the previous deck. This time we've got Starmie, so we can afford to play a little bit less energy because we can get the energy back into our hand with Starmie. I think 13 is the right number. I could potentially be convinced to play 12, but energy is just such a core part of this deck. It uses it for attacks and steam ups and everything else that it's too big not to play. Um, Other deck considerations, since we have Brooklet Hill, some people have tried to play Octillery in the deck instead of a Rangaroo. Obviously, Octillery gives you 5 cards instead of 3, so the draw is better with Octillery. The big difference is, obviously, it's a stage 1, so it's harder to get out. Sometimes it makes you make a decision between whether you're going to focus on Starmie or Octillery, because it can be hard to get both of them into play since it's so many Pokemon to search out for. But the other big thing to consider with this is we really only have 2 Pokemon that are at all capable of knocking out the non-GX Alolan Ninetales. That would be Volcanion and Oranguru. Sometimes people don't think about Oranguru as being able to as an attacker, but it does 60 damage plus 20 for each energy on it. Alolan Ninetales attacks for 3 energy, which means this does exactly 120, which is just enough to knock out that Alolan Ninetales. And it's not weak to Ninetales, so it can take 2 hits. Oranguru ends up being kind of a cool attacker that you don't expect to use. But in that matchup, it ends up being pretty big. So that was the deck. Like I said, I played it this weekend at the ARG Standard Tournament in Raleigh, North Carolina. I finished in top 8. It was a pretty diverse field. There was a ton of Metagross there and a decent amount of Gardevoir. Unfortunately, I started off kind of patchy in the tournament, and all the Metagross did really well because it's such a strong deck and it takes free wins against Gardevoir. So I lost my first round playing against Alolan Ninetales because the weakness makes it kind of tough. And then all the Metagross won their first round, so I couldn't get paired against them. And then finally, the final round of Swiss, I got paired against a Metagross for my winning in, and I was like, all right, man, I deserve this. I had to beat all these other decks to get here. I beat a Gardevoir in Swiss. I deserve to get a free win. But yeah, Metagross did really well that tournament. I watched it play against Gardevoir a few times. Some of the Gardevoir decks are playing Sylveon GX, and some of them are playing Turtonator. Turtonator is more to counter Golisopod, but the Sylveon GX, their game plan is to use Plea GX to make the Metagross player pick back up their Metagross and lose all the energy and ability and everything they put into play to try and make their core strategy work. I watched one of the matchups, and the Metagross player actually played Magearna EX, which means that Plea GX does nothing if Metagross has energy attached to it. So Plea ended up being useless. It was good Worlds caliber players playing Metagross, or playing the Gardevoir GX decks, but I didn't see a single one beat Metagross. I know people say it's winnable, and it is winnable, but it's one of the worst matchups right now, I feel like, in the format. So it ended up giving Metagross just a clean sweep. I ended up going to the top 8. We all decided to prize split. I think most of us had a decent drive home, and as soon as we thought about it, it's like, man, I can get 3-4 hours of my life back, and we all get paid anyway. We all decided to just split the money and go home. In my top 8 match, I was going to play against a Gardevoir deck, which I was looking forward to because part of why I went to the tournament was to be able to test a little bit better. I haven't played this deck with this exact list as much as I would like to, and I wanted to kind of explore the Gardevoir matchup a little bit better. Like I said, I beat it in Swiss, but I wanted another chance to have a look at it. So I felt pretty good about the matchup, but mostly I wanted to go home, so that ended up taking priority for me. Going over some of the matchups against Gardevoir GX, like I mentioned, your kind of big focus is going to be around that Turtonator. If you can Kiawe onto it, that's cool. If you go second, though, you're going to want to take a knockout on either a, whatever, like a Ralt or a Alolan Vulpix, whatever they leave active. If you can knock out the Octillery Remoraid, if you can knock out the Remoraid, that's way better because Octillery is just way too good. So taking that knockout's big, which means you need to get a Fighting Fury Belt and a Steam Up or 2 Steam Ups. Ideally, you put those energies onto a Turtonator so that once they get a Gardevoir set up, you can knock it out. But um, Baby's pretty cool in that matchup. Baby Volcanion. Like I said, the Starmie makes it a lot more winnable because it lets you one-shot with Turtonator with a lot less effort and more consistently. Other big stuff in the matchup, Golisopod. Pure Golisopod is a super easy matchup. Like it's basically free. You can lose it, it's possible, but it's kind of tough to lose. Golisopod Garbodor, on the other hand, still a very favorable matchup, but it's one you can lose. You don't have to play a lot of items if your starting hands are good for that, but you end up with a lot of just like, sometimes you can end up with an awkward hand that's just a bunch of items and a Sycamore, and you have to either not play the game or put a bunch of items in your discard. And when it comes down to it, putting items in the discard is going to be better. So you end up racing against your opponent. You have to kind of focus on Baby Volcanion so that they're at least only getting one prize at a time. It can get dicey, but since you hit Golisopod for weakness, you still end up winning the match more often than not, for sure. Obviously, Metagross is a really good matchup. Alolan Ninetales is a bad matchup. Part of it's, I'd say the main reason is because of that baby Alolan Ninetales. It can take one-shots on your EX and GX Pokemon with a Choice Band attached, because it does 80 plus the 30 from a Choice Band, doubles to 220. So it takes easy knockouts, and it takes you a lot of effort to knock it out in return, because you need 3 energy on either a Rangaroo or on a Baby Volcanion, and if it's the Baby Volcanion, you also need either a Fighting Fury Belt or a Steam Up. So it's just awkward to take the knockout because you end up investing a lot of energy on a Pokemon that they're like, he's just going to get a return knockout because they play Aqua Patch. So you knock something out, and then the next turn they just power up another Pokemon. But again, like you're a super fast, super aggressive deck. So if you can just take prizes faster than they can, then sometimes that can be all you need to do to win. It's definitely winnable. Those are kind of the big threats in the format right now. There's also more like pure Garbodor decks. Garbodor Drampa is a pretty good matchup just because Drampa can't knock out your Turtonator or Ho-Oh. It just doesn't do enough damage. And you have a decently easy time taking 2 prizes on their guys. So usually those will be fairly short games where you just take your knockouts and win the game. Espeon Garbodor is a tougher matchup because Espeon, its second attack Psychic or Side Drive or whatever, it does damage based on the amount of energy you have. So if you power up a Ho-Oh GX and you're like, yeah, I'm going to knock out your guys, you can Kiawe onto your Ho-Oh, and if they power up an Espeon, all they need is a Psychic, a DC, and a Choice Band. So if they power up an Espeon, Guzma up your Ho-Oh, they can take a knockout right after you Kiawa'd it. So you just wasted a turn, they took 2 prizes, and you don't have a good way of responding. So that matchup can be a little scarier, but I still definitely think it's favored for Volcanion, just because it's such a strong deck. It's just super fast. I also played against a Xerneas Break deck. Volcanion's definitely favored in that. You're too fast. It takes them too long to set up. You take too many prizes too quickly. Volcanion has really even to slightly favorable matchups against most of the field. The only kind of dicey one really is Gardevoir and I guess Ninetales. Um, but I feel like with this build, Gardevoir is a lot more winnable. Um, so give the deck a try. Let me know what you think. This is brought to you by Pro Play Games and Ultra Pro. Thanks for watching. Give us a like and a subscribe.